Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to read Frankenstein chapter 18, and we're going to do it through Actively Learn. Now, if you've gotten this far, you've probably seen my instructions on Google Classroom on how to access Actively Learn, but all you're going to do is follow the link and press Login with Google, and it should take you right to your assignments posted by me, which is Frankenstein chapter 18. Now, we've got a couple of things going on in this assignment. So we're going to read chapter 18. You can listen along as I read it, but there's also notes within the text. There are questions put in the text for you to answer. And we have one main task, which is to focus on sentences that exemplify or show romanticism. So if you're here and you say, I don't know what romanticism is, make sure you did the Nearpod from 427 and 428 so you can get that definition of romanticism. Now, before I start reading, I want to show you a couple of features of Actively Learn just in case you haven't used it before. So Actively Learn is just basically a way for me to give you a text that I've annotated and put notes and questions in online. So just the same as I might mark up a reading passage and hand it to you with questions, this does basically the same thing. So as you read, you're going to see questions pop up and you're going to see parts of the text highlighted, okay? So you'll see I've highlighted it and made a note, and you see up here it says Miss McIntyre, right? These are notes that I've made to help you understand the text. Now, if at any point you want to make a note in the text, all you have to do is highlight the section or the word, highlight the word, and you can insert I don't know if you can insert a question actually. I can't see your form of it, but you probably can't insert a question. But you can insert a note. You can define the word. So say you wanted to look this word up, laborious. I would just highlight the word and then click define. All right, and there's the definition right here. Requiring a lot of time and effort. So say you feel like you don't know how to say this word. You can click
laborious.
And it comes up, laborious, right? Say that you think you won't remember this definition and you want to make a note of it. You can copy this, insert a note, and put your definition that you copied right there. That way, you have it. I'm going to press cancel because I don't want it in there. Another thing that you might want to do as you read using Actively Learn is if you do go to define, you can keep this sidebar up. Now, it does cover up my notes, right? If you need to see them, you can just click back on a note and it should, you might have to close this. Okay. So disquisition, we've looked this word up, but say now you're reading and you see, I'm just going to pick an easy word because I'm up here. So say I see material. And I can just go ahead and define a new word right there. So once you're in that define window, you can define whatever word you want to type in. You can also see my notes on the side. You can submit question answers and everything right here in the text. This should help you kind of break down some of those words a little bit more. But remember, just like with the rest of the text, the importance is that you're getting that main idea and what they're talking about. There absolutely will be words, will be lines, will be sections that you don't understand. And a really advanced reading skill is being able to kind of have the confidence to just push past that, right? If it becomes important, I'll help you figure it out. But there's a good chance that if you're still getting the gist, the main idea of this complex text, it's okay to pass by a couple of words, phrases, sections that you just don't really get. Because there's so much here, it would take us a lifetime to dissect every word. So don't get discouraged if there's a passage or a line that you don't understand. Just keep moving and let me know if at any point you don't get the main idea or the action of the text. So as we go along, I'm going to read aloud. You can click on my notes. You can follow along with me. If at any point you get to a question, you can pause the read aloud video so that you can answer the question and move on without getting lost in the text. So before we begin, a quick summary of where we're at. At the end of chapter 17, Victor agrees to the monster's terms. So the monster says, make me a female monster so that I have a companion, or I'm going to make you miserable, kill your family, whatever I need to do. So Victor finally agrees and says, okay, I'll make you a female monster, even though making the first monster nearly killed me. So he's really dreading it. He doesn't want to do it. And so in chapter 18, which we're about to read, Victor has returned to his family with this kind of like weight and burden of making the new creation. So he's in kind of a rough place, anxious and worried about creating this monster. So right now he's at his family home, getting ready to start his new creation. So before we move on, I'm going to just show you the answer to this question because it's kind of a review. So which of these answer choices best describes the romantic style? So again, this goes back to that Nearpod from Monday, Tuesday. So the romantic style is art that is created with a focus on returning to the simplicity of nature. So as we're reading, we're looking for nature, right? Simplicity. It says common people are heroes. Everyday people are heroes. And the artist, so that means Mary Shelley in this case, the author, is skeptical, or she doesn't really believe in scientists or radical thinkers. They want to return to a simpler time, not move forward quickly into the present. Into the future. So that's the romantic style. So we're looking for nature, simplicity, everyday people, a mistrust of science, right? And kind of that desire to return to the past. All right, so without further ado, let's start reading chapter 18 of Frankenstein. Day after day, week after week passed away on my return to Geneva, and I could not collect the courage to recommence my work. I feared the vengeance of the disappointed fiend, yet I was unable to overcome my repugnance to the task which was enjoined me. I found that I could not compose a female without again devoting several months to profound study and laborious disquisition. I had heard of some discoveries having been made by an English philosopher, the knowledge of which was material to my success, and I sometimes thought of obtaining my father's consent to visit England for this purpose, but I clung to every pretense of delay, and shrunk from taking the first step in an undertaking whose immediate necessity began to appear less absolute to me. A change indeed had taken place in me. My health, which had hitherto declined, was now much restored, and my spirits, when unchecked by the memory of my unhappy promise, rose proportionably. My father saw this change with pleasure, and he turned his thoughts toward the best method of eradicating the remains of my melancholy, which every now and then would return by fits, and with a devouring blackness overcast the approaching sunshine. At these moments I took refuge in the most perfect solitude. I passed whole days on the lake alone in a little boat, watching the clouds and listening to the rippling of the waves, silent and listless. But the fresh air and bright sun seldom failed to restore me to some degree of composure, and on my return I met the salutations of my friends with a readier smile and a more cheerful heart. My dog started the TV. Fun little Easter egg in the middle there. Okay, moving on. It was after my return from one of these rambles that my father, calling me aside, thus addressed me. I am happy to remark, my dear son, that you have resumed your former pleasures and seem to be returning to yourself. And yet you are still unhappy and still avoid our society. For some time I was lost in conjecture as to the cause of this, but yesterday an idea struck me, and if it is well founded, I conjure you to avow it. Reserve on such a point would be not only useless, but draw down treble misery on us all. I trembled violently at his exordium, and my father continued. I confess, my son, that I have always looked forward to your marriage with our dear Elizabeth as the tie of our domestic comfort and the stay of my declining years. You were attached to each other from your earliest infancy. You studied together and appeared in dispositions and tastes entirely suited to one another. But so blind is the experience of man that what I conceive to be the best assistance to my plan may have entirely destroyed it. You, perhaps, regard her as your sister, without any wish that she might become your wife. Nay, you may have met with another whom you may love, and considering yourself as bound in honor to Elizabeth, this struggle may occasion the poignant misery which you appear to feel. My dear father, reassure yourself. I love my cousin tenderly and sincerely. I never saw any woman who excited, as Elizabeth does, my warmest admiration and affection. My future hopes and prospects are entirely bound up in the expectation of our union. The expression of your sentiments of this subject, my dear Victor, gives me more pleasure than I have for some time experienced. If you feel thus, we shall assuredly be happy. However, present events may cast a gloom over us, but it is this gloom which appears to have taken so strong a hold of your mind that I wish to dissipate. Tell me, therefore, whether you object to an immediate solemnization of the marriage. We have been unfortunate, and recent events have drawn us from that everyday tranquility befitting my years and infirmities. You are younger, yet I do not suppose, possessed as you are of a competent fortune, that an early marriage would at all interfere with any future plans of honor and utility that you may have formed. Do not suppose, however, that I wish to dictate happiness on you, or that a delay on your part would cause me any serious uneasiness. Interpret my words with candor, and answer me, I conjure you, with confidence and sincerity. I listened to my father in silence, and remained for some time incapable of offering any reply. I resolved rapidly in my mind a multitude of thoughts, and endeavored to arrive at some conclusion. Alas! To me the idea of an immediate union with my Elizabeth was one of horror and dismay. I was bound by a solemn promise, which I had not yet fulfilled and dared not break. Or if I did, what manifold miseries might not impend over me and my devoted family? Could I enter into a festival with this deadly weight hanging round my neck and bowing me to the ground? I must perform my engagement and let the monster depart with his mate before I allowed myself to enjoy the delight of a union from which I expected peace. I remembered also the necessity imposed upon me of either journeying to England or entering into a long correspondence with those philosophers of that country, whose knowledge and discoveries were of indispensable use to me in my present undertaking. The latter method of obtaining the desired intelligence was dilatory and unsatisfactory. Besides, I had an insurmountable aversion to the idea of engaging myself in my loathsome task in my father's house, while in habits of familiar intercourse with those I loved. I knew that 1,000 fearful accidents might occur, the slightest of which would disclose a tale to thrill all connected with me with horror. I was aware also that I should often lose all self-command, all capacity of hiding the harrowing sensations that would possess me during the progress of my unearthly occupation. I must absent myself from all I loved while thus employed. Once commenced, it would quickly be achieved, and I might be restored to my family in peace and happiness. My promise fulfilled, the monster would depart forever, or so my fond fancy imaged. Some accident might meanwhile occur to destroy him and put an end to my slavery forever. These feelings dictated my answer to my father. I expressed a wish to visit England, but concealing the true reasons of this request, I clothed my desires under a guise which excited no suspicion, while I urged my desire with an earnestness that easily induced my father to comply. After so long a period of an absorbing melancholy that resembled madness in its intensity and effects, he was glad to find that I was capable of taking pleasure in the idea of such a journey, and he hoped that change of scene and varied amusement would, before my return, have restored me entirely to myself. The duration of my absence was left to my own choice. A few months, or at most a year, was the period contemplated. One paternal kind precaution he had taken to ensure my having a companion. Without previously communicating with me, he had, in concert with Elizabeth, arranged that Clerval should join me at Strasbourg. This interfered with the solitude I coveted for the prosecution of my task, yet at the commencement of my journey the presence of my friend could in no way be an impediment, and truly I rejoiced that thus I should be saved many hours of lonely, maddening reflection. Nay, Henry might stand between me and the intrusion of my foe. If I were alone, Would he not at times force his abhorred presence on me to remind me of my task or to contemplate its progress? To England, therefore, I was bound, and it was understood that my union with Elizabeth should take place immediately on my return. My father's age rendered him extremely averse to delay. For myself, there was one reward I promised myself from my detested toils, one consolation for my unparalleled sufferings. It was the prospect of that day when, enfranchised from my miserable slavery, I might claim Elizabeth and forget the past in my union with her. I now made arrangements for my journey, but one feeling now haunted me, which filled me with fear and agitation. During my absence, I should leave my friends unconscious of the existence of their enemy and unprotected from his attacks, exasperated as he might be by my departure. But he had promised to follow me wherever I might go, and would he not accompany me to England? This imagination was dreadful in itself, but soothing inasmuch as it supposed the safety of my friends. I was agonized with the idea of the possibility that the reverse of this might happen. But through the whole period during which I was the slave of my creature, I allowed myself to be governed by the impulses of the moment, and my present sensations strongly intimated that the fiend would follow me and exempt my family from the danger of his machinations. It was in the latter end of September that I again quitted my native country. My journey had been my own suggestion, and Elizabeth therefore acquiesced. But she was filled with disquiet at the idea of my suffering. Away from her, the inroads of misery and grief. It had been her care which provided me a companion in Clerval, and yet a man is blind to 1,000 minute circumstances which call forth a woman's sedulous attention. She longed to bid me hasten my return. 1,000 conflicting emotions rendered her mute as she bade me a tearful, silent farewell. I threw myself into the carriage that was to convey me away, hardly knowing whither I was going and careless of what was passing around. I remembered only, and it was with a bitter anguish that I reflected on it, to order that my chemical instruments should be packed to go with me. Filled with dreary imaginations, I passed through many beautiful and majestic scenes, but my eyes were fixed and unobserving. I could only think of the bourne of my travels and the work which was to occupy me whilst they endured. After some days spent in listless indolence, during which I traversed many leagues, I arrived at Strasbourg, where I waited 2 days for Clerval. He came. Alas, how great was the contrast between us! He was alive to every new scene, joyful when he saw the beauties of the setting sun, and more happy when he beheld it rise and recommence a new day. He pointed out to me the shifting colors of the landscape and the appearances of the sky. "This is what it is to live," he cried. "Now I enjoy existence. But you, my dear Frankenstein, wherefore are you desponding and sorrowful?" In truth, I was occupied by gloomy thoughts, and neither saw the descent of the evening star nor the golden sunrise reflected in the Rhine. And you, my friend, would be far more amused with the journal of Clerval, who observed the scenery with an eye of feeling and delight, than in listening to my reflections. I, a miserable wretch, haunted by a curse that shut up every avenue to enjoyment. We had agreed to descend the Rhine in a boat from Strasbourg to Rotterdam, whence we might take shipping for London. During this voyage, we passed many willowy islands and saw several beautiful towns. We stayed a day at Mannheim, and on the fifth from our departure from Strasbourg, arrived at Mainz. The course of the Rhine below Mainz becomes much more picturesque. The river descends rapidly and winds between hills, not high, but steep and of beautiful forms. We saw many ruined castles standing on the edges of precipices, surrounded by black woods, high and inaccessible. This part of the Rhine, indeed, presents a singularly variegated landscape. In one spot you view rugged hills, ruined castles overlooking tremendous precipices, with the dark Rhine rushing beneath, and on the sudden turn of a promontory, flourishing vineyards with green sloping banks and a meandering river, and populous towns occupy the scene. We traveled at the time of the vintage, that just means they're harvesting wine, and heard the song of the laborers as we glided down the stream. Even I, depressed in my mind and my spirits continually agitated by gloomy feelings, even I was pleased. I lay at the bottom of the boat, and as I gazed on the cloudless blue sky, I seemed to drink in tranquility to which I had long been a stranger. And if these were my sensations, who can describe those of Henry? He felt as if he had been transported to fairyland and enjoyed a happiness seldom tasted by man. I have seen, he said, the most beautiful scenes of my own country. I have visited the lakes of Lucerne and Uri, where the snowy mountains descend almost perpendicularly to the water, casting black and impenetrable shades, which would cause a gloomy and mournful appearance, were it not for the most verdant islands that relieve the eye by their gay appearance. I have seen this lake agitated by a tempest, when the wind tore up whirlwinds of water and gave you an idea of what the waterspout must be on the great ocean. And the waves dashed with fury the base of the mountain, where the priest and his mistress were overwhelmed by an avalanche, and where their dying voices are still said to be heard amid the pauses of the nightly wind. I have seen the mountains of La Valais and the Pays de Vaud, but this country, Victor, pleases me more than all those wonders. The mountains of Switzerland are more majestic and strange, but there is a charm in the banks of this divine river that I never before saw equaled. Look at that castle which overhangs yon precipice, and that also on the island, almost concealed amongst the foliage of these lovely trees. And now that group of laborers coming from among their vines, and that village half hid in the recess of the mountain. Oh, surely the spirit that inhabits and guards this place has a soul more in harmony with man than those who pile the glacier or retire to the inaccessible peaks of the mountains of our own country. Clerval, beloved friend, even now it delights me to record your words and to dwell on the praise of which you are so eminently deserving. He was a being formed in the very poetry of nature. His wild and enthusiastic imagination was chastened by the sensibility of his heart. His soul overflowed with ardent affections, and his friendship was of that devoted and wondrous nature that the worldly minded teach us to look for only in the imagination. But even human sympathies were not sufficient to satisfy his eager mind. The scenery of external nature, which others regard only with admiration, he loved with ardor. The sounding cataract haunted him like a passion, the tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood. Their colors and their forms were then to him an appetite, a feeling, and a love, that had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied, or any interest unborrowed from the eye. Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey. And where does Clerval now exist? Is this gentle and lovely being lost forever? Has this mind, so replete with ideas, imaginations fanciful and magnificent, which formed a world, whose existence depended on the life of its creator, has the mind perished? Does it now only exist in my memory? No, it is not thus. Your form so divinely wrought and beaming with beauty has decayed, but your spirit still visits and consoles your unhappy friend. Perhaps pardon this gush of sorrow. These ineffectual words are but a slight tribute to the unexampled worth of Henry, but they soothe my heart, overflowing with the anguish which his remembrance creates. I will proceed with my tale. Beyond Cologne, we descended to the plains of Holland, and we resolved to post the remainder of our way, for the wind was contrary, and the stream of the river was too gentle to aid us. Our journey here lost the interest arising from beautiful scenery, but we arrived in a few days at Rotterdam, whence we proceeded by sea to England. It was on a clear morning in the latter days of December that I first saw the white cliffs of Britain. The banks of the Thames presented a new scene. They were flat but fertile, and almost every town was marked by the remembrance of some story. We saw Tilbury Fort and remembered the Spanish Armada, Gravesend, Woolwich, and Greenwich, places which I had heard of, even in my country. At length we saw the numerous steeples of London, St. Paul's towering above all, and the Tower famed in English history. End of chapter 18. Now, I'm not going to go through too much in chapter 18 because I do have like a bunch of notes and questions in here, but just a couple of things I want to point out. So, summary wise, essentially what happens here is Victor can't really figure out what to do about this female monster. He knows there are some scientists in England who study this kind of thing and can probably help him. So he's trying to figure out, should I go to England or should I just kind of like try to write them? But of course, back then, that would have taken forever to write them because people would have been transporting the letters, would have taken forever. So he can't decide, but then his father makes this comment like, hey, are you really sad because you don't want to marry your cousin sister? And Victor's like, no, I'm cool with that. I really want to marry her. I just don't really know what I want to do it. And the father's like, let's do it right now. You guys get married immediately. And so Victor doesn't want to do that because he knows he has to create this female monster. So basically what he does to kind of put his dad off for a while is says, I need to go to England, right? So he plans this trip to England. His dad's really worried about him because Victor's been going in and out of this depression. So Victor's dad decides, I'm going to send Henry with him to take care of him, to be his companion, and to make sure he's all right. So at the end of the chapter, Henry and Victor are traveling to England from Geneva, which is where the family lives. So they're traveling to England. And you have a ton of beautiful description of scenery toward the end here. Let me see what my paragraph number is. 18, 19, 20, they're talking about all this beautiful scenery that they see. And this is that romantic style, right? Talking about the power of nature. Victor is in one of the worst positions of his life, but this kind of scenery is healing him. And Clerval, Henry, remember Henry's Victor's kind of foil. Whatever we learn about Henry is probably the opposite about Victor. So as we're learning that Henry is just like this passionate man who's so excited by nature and has this great imagination and this great love of everything around him, we're supposed to know that Victor's kind of the opposite, right? They're kind of opposites of each other. Henry is very romantic in the sense of the style. He loves nature. He loves people. He's simple. He wants to go back to a simple time where he can just enjoy nature, right? So Henry is kind of doing that there in this middle section. Again, lots of description of the, I lost my train of thought. Lots of description of the scenery. That's great romantic content in here. All of this obsession with how beautiful it is. One of the things that I want to point out is as we get to 24 and 25, Victor kind of like juts into the story and starts kind of going on and on about Clerval. He says, where does he, that means Clerval, now exist? Is this gentle and lovely being lost forever? Huh? Nothing's happened to Clerval yet in the story, right? They're just on their way to England. So why all of a sudden is he kind of talking about Clerval, right? And he says, does it now only exist in my memory? So we've got kind of a weird moment here, right? Where Mary Shelley is foreshadowing something that's going to happen to Clerval, but we still don't know what it is. But we know that Victor is talking about where is Clerval now, right? Does it only exist in memory? Okay, this is a little odd. And I've got a note in here about it with a question. But another thing I want to point out here, and this is really critical to what Mary Shelley's doing, right? She's comparing Henry and Clerval for a reason. And she has this great line in here that compares them directly. When Victor's talking about Clerval, he says, has this mind so replete with ideas, imaginations fanciful and magnificent, which formed a world whose existence depended on the life of its creator. Has the mind perished? So we know that Victor created a being, and that being depends on Victor to thrive, right? This is a moment where Mary Shelley compares Clerval to Victor because he's saying that Clerval forms a world, forms creation in his mind by being imaginative and having all of these ideas. So he's saying Clerval's also a creator. He created a beautiful world in his mind through his imagination. And the existence of that world that he imagined depends on Clerval, right? So this is a moment where the two are directly compared. They're both creators, but what Clerval created is fanciful and magnificent. What Victor created is horrible and deadly. Okay, that's really important to note, that the two men have similar actions, but their characters are so completely opposite that you can compare the two men to each other. So we're getting the sense now something's going to happen to Clerval. We have no idea what it is at this point, but it probably isn't good, judging by the book so far. And then at the end, they kind of return to their adventure, the scenery, and they arrive in England by the end of the chapter. So as we move on, think about these little moments of foreshadowing that Mary Shelley's dropping in. We've got the wedding coming up. We've got something happening to Clerval. We've got the creation of the female monster. So all of this stuff is kind of that rising actions, rising to a moment where something really big, or maybe multiple really big things, are going to happen. So with that, that is the end of chapter 18. I think we're going to skip chapter 19. I'm going to look back over it, but I think we're going to skip chapter 19. I'll summarize it and move on to chapter 20. All right. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.